All right, folks, before we head back to court, I want to bring in our guests for this hour, trial attorneys Alexis Rosenberg and Vonda Sargent. Thank you both for joining me this evening. Truly appreciate it. Vonda, I'll start with you. The state decided, or the Commonwealth decided, to start with the daughter of both the victim and the defendant. Clearly, she's right in the middle of all this. The mother called her downstairs. She was upstairs at the time of the incident. And I wondered about the decision to call her first, but she was a wealth of information, clearly. What are your thoughts on calling her first, and also what she provided for the state?
I think it was wise to call her first. I think having her the first person that the jury sees, because she was actually at the scene, was a very good idea. I think the information that she provided is absolutely fascinating because it helps both sides. From what I've gathered right now, it appears as though the state is going for an argument that this woman, the wife, was controlling. She was unable to forgive the affair. She did everything she possibly could to make sure that her husband would still find her attractive. She stayed fit. Her whole life was Zumba, and she did everything she was supposed to do, and that was not enough. And she ultimately killed him. I think that's the state's theory. And I think the defense theory, and all of this from the testimony from the daughter, is that the father has early onset dementia with the memory loss, the getting angry from not being able to have that cognitive ability, and then the mixing of the alcohol and the Adderall. So I think we're going to see some experts from the defense talking about the impact of mixing those two drugs. And I think we probably will have an expert talking about what early onset dementia, how it presents itself earlier in people's lives. Yeah. So that's what I think is happening right now.
All right, fair enough. Alexis, I want to get your thoughts, particularly about those issues. Number one, I was wondering how the memory thing would play into this case. As far as the Adderall and the drinking, we know that he was sober, left that all behind for about 2 years before this actual incident. So it's interesting to see how the defense will try to connect those things. But my takeaway, and I think this was very damaging for what the defense is trying to establish, Mom was controlling, as Vonda said. She was the instigator of most of the fights. We all heard this from the daughter. And also, no physical violence from the father ever in the home, as far as she saw. What do you make of it?
I agree with you, Michael. I think that the defense does have a problem at this point. Because she's setting the tone of the house, that the mother was, it appears from the testimony, upset, rightfully so, over the divorce, was really controlling where he was going, what he was doing, keeping an eye on him. And that, I don't know about this memory thing, bringing it out with her, though. I have to say, I'm not so sure if I was the attorney that I would have really honed in on the memory thing with the daughter. But I think kind of sprinkling the memory thing, we are definitely going to see experts that are going to show the impact related to past alcohol use, because we've had testimony to this point that he wasn't currently using, combined with the use of the Adderall and possibly other drugs that he may or may not have been using at the time or leading up to this. Because we could have the dementia based on heavy alcohol use and possible drug use prior, leading up to that. It didn't have to be right at this given moment, as most of us know.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think you might be right, Vonda, because there was testimony elicited about his frustration and aggravation with not being able to remember things. And we know sometimes folks with dementia, getting into those sort of rhythms, they can be very violent sometimes. So that might be part of why they explain he might have attacked her under those circumstances. All right, ladies, stand by. I want to take folks back into court. The defendant's adopted son, Angel Ritchie, is now on the stand. Let's get you back into court.
And after specifically January 28th, when something happened at your house, did you go and live with another family member for a couple months?
My grandfather's.
And then eventually you were able to move back to Marine Street.
Yeah.
And where was your bedroom in the Marine Street house?
Basement.
And prior to January 28th of 2021, who else lived in the house at Marine Street?
You said prior, so beforehand?
Yes.
Me, my sister, dad, and mom.
Okay. And if it's okay, I want to talk about those people that you just mentioned, your sister, your mom, and your dad. Who's your mom? What's her name?
Christine Ritchie / Sanchez.
And do you see her in the courtroom today?
Yes.
Can you just tell us something that she's wearing, like a color of a piece of clothing she's wearing?
Blazer. Beige blazer.
May the record reflect the witness has identified the defendant.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
The record will so reflect.
In January of 2021, did your mom work?
I believe so. It would have been online Zumba, I believe.
Okay. And other than kind of doing Zumba, did you know her to have any other jobs outside the house, or was she primarily kind of at home?
Most part at home.
Did you know if she was engaged in any classes during that time period?
School, I believe so. Yeah.
And would that be college or high school?
Yes. College.
And do you know what she was studying at that time?
Psychology would have been would be my best guess.
And you also mentioned that during that time period, your father was living in the home.
Yeah.
Who is your father?
Michael Joseph Ritchie.
And is that your biological father?
No,
When did you come to know Michael?
my whole life.
Your whole life?
Yeah.
And at some point, did he become your father legally?
2004.
And so in 2004, did Michael legally adopt you?
Yes.
And is that when you took the Ritchie name?
Yes.
And so what did you call him? What did you call
I've
Michael?
always called him Dad.
Always Dad?
Yeah.
And did you know what Michael did for a living?
Firefighter. And then part-time at the fire sprinkler company stuff. So whatever that entitles.
Okay. And did he work with a particular person that you and your family knew at the fire sprinkler company?
One of them, Mark McDonald, would have been his higher up.
Okay. Is that somebody that you knew as a family friend?
Yeah, we would have referred him as uncle through my father, yeah.
And your father passed away, correct?
Yeah.
And when was that he passed away?
January either 27th or 28th, 21.
Do you know how old he was when he passed away?
$57? I can't remember.
Okay. You also mentioned at that time in January of 2021, your sister was living in the home, right? What's your sister's name?
Sophia,
And how old is she?
20.
And do you have any other siblings?
Michael, little Michael.
Little Michael. And so fair to say he's a junior.
Yeah,
And is that what you and the family call him, as Little Michael?
yeah.
Now, in January of 2021, was Michael Jr. living in the home on Marine Street?
That month?
Yes.
No.
Do you know when?
All right, so 3 kids in the Ritchie household. There was Angel, who was the oldest but not the biological son of Michael Ritchie. Then Michael Jr. was the middle child. Cynthia was the youngest. All right, we need to take a break.
All right,
Defendants
folks,
will
we'll
get back to
continue
court in just a minute. But first, let's bring back in our guest trial attorneys, Alexis Rosenberg and Vonda Sargent. Alexis, I'll start with you. The state started with the daughter, Sophia. They followed that up now with another child, Angel. And he's the adopted son, has very nice things to say about the victim in this case. But again, he is someone who was not in the house at the time, but he's going to be like a scene setter. Again, someone to give us some context as to the relationship between those two. Very important for the state.
I agree, because what he's testifying, this was a very hostile house. There was a lot of tension going on, and the testimony states that the mother was very angry about this affair. She seemed to not be able to be moving past, seemed to be escalating. What hasn't come out, and I'm curious to wait to hear, is whether they're going to elicit testimony about whether it escalated to physical. Because right now we've only heard there's been a lot of yelling and everybody seemed to be hiding to get away from this, and it was going on a regular basis. But we haven't gotten, was there anything that became physical during these arguments?
Yeah, well, we heard nothing on the part, at least as what the kids saw, on the part of the father, but there will be testimony, according to pretrial motions, that people saw him, the victim, with bruises and also a cut. Well, the daughter did talk about a cut lip. So I think there was some violence going from the defendant to the victim. Vonda, quickly, a lot of this we're talking about, a lot of the testimony that's being elicited now from these first two witnesses goes to motive. Now, we certainly know that the state doesn't need to prove motive, but in a case like this, where the only real living witness is the defendant to this, and she's likely going to testify and tell her story, the idea of motive becomes very, very important for this jury to understand what really happened between those two.
You know, I agree with you on that. They don't have to prove it, but I think that Angel did give us the motive. One line that really stuck out to me was that she was persistent on getting the truth, which means she was ruminating about this. It went on and on for years on end, and he couldn't get away from the fighting. So I agree with Alexis 100% that there was a lot of hostility, a lot of tension in that household. And Angel told us that she was persistent on getting at the truth, which means she was just going on and on and on. And I don't think there was anything that Michael could have said to her to fulfill what it is that she needed to hear from him about why he cheated on her. And so it's pretty clear to me that it's the cheating was the motivation for the mom to finally snap and end Michael's life, according to the state's theory of the case.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way at this point. All that tension in the house seemed to be coming from her, and her inability to deal with the idea that he had this affair.
It's just sad to watch.
All right. That's going to do it for our coverage of the White Stabs murder trial. Thanks to Vonda Sargent, Alexis Rosenberg for being with us tonight. Folks, stick around. Coming up, we're going to review the 3 things that we've learned today in the cases we've been covering from coast to coast.